Thank you, Mark. Thanks for filling in, Mark. And hey, everybody at home. Hey, everybody. I feel like telling you I'll just come on out. So I didn't have a title. You didn't see a title from me on the bulletin this morning. I kind of don't usually know where I'm going until I get there. Sometimes I was going to say mere hours before I get here, but that's not exactly true. But anyway, with Halloween, I kind of knew I wanted to do something about fear. And we're going to do that today. If our Tuesday class, which a lot of you are in, we're finishing up a book called 21 Voices of Peace. Let Peace Begin with Me. And what it is, it's 21 interviews with various New Thought leaders and lay people. And it's talking about the interviewer, which is Mindy Audlin. She did this on Unity Radio. And what she was interviewing people about is their opinions on how we get to world peace and personal peace. And so thinking about that format, as I was researching today, I came across so many wonderful readings that I decided I'm going to share some of those with you today. And we're going to listen to what a few people have to say about how we overcome fear by turning to faith. So if you know me well, I endeavor in October to watch a scary movie almost every day. And not things that are violent, not things, not crime taking place or anything like that, but spooky things, psychological thrillers and jump scares and things like that. When we think of Halloween and we think of things that are scary, we're talking about that kind of stuff, whether it's a book or it's a haunted house or it's a costume. The things that feel scary to us are not usually deep-seated fears. The things that scare us most, these non-deep-seated fears, the reason they don't get to us is because our subconscious mind knows that these frights are imaginary. Our subconscious mind knows that no matter how scared we may be in the moment, these things are artificial and we're really not in any true danger. But that doesn't mean that fears are imagined. That's far from the truth. They say that one of the biggest fears we have is fear of death. But we have a lot of fears. We have fears about our health, about our children and their well-being. We fear abandonment and conflict and war. And these things are deep-seated fears. And most of these types of things have probably been with us since our childhoods. Psychology calls them primordial fears. And those types of things can put us in true danger. Not only in mortal danger, but fear can cause us great psychological harm. We could sum up this lesson by saying, okay, fear lives in the human consciousness and faith lives in the spiritual consciousness. So just get over it and switch, but it isn't that easy, is it? And we'll go a little bit deeper and see what we can find out. So the first reading that I'm going to share with you is from the book. I'm going to say the book because I haven't seen the movie, The Life of Pi by Jan Martel. And in this reading, the character is scared. And so he's giving his, he's telling us what he thinks about fear. And he says, I must say a word about fear. It is life's only true opponent. Only fear can defeat life. It's a clever, treacherous adversary with no decency, respect, law, or convention, and it shows no mercy. It goes for your weakest spots, which it finds with unerring ease. And it always begins in your mind. One minute you're feeling calm and happy, and then fear, disguised in the garb of a mild-mannered doubt, slips into your mind like a spy. Doubt meets disbelief, and disbelief tries to push it out and does away with it with little trouble. And reason does come and go, but eventually, once again, you feel yourself wavering, and your anxiety once again turns to dread. He next starts talking about how fear will take over physiology, every system of our body. It starts when fear comes in, and our brain just knows, whether true or untrue, something is terribly wrong here. He very poetically says, Your lungs can fly away like a bird. Your heart strains too hard. Your stomach turns. Your knees shake. You make rash decisions and dismiss hope and trust. Fear, which is but an impression, has triumphed over you, and you feel defeated. And I thought that was really relatable. At least it was relatable to me. And he sums this up, and he gives us a fix for this. He says, you have to fight hard to shine the light of truth upon fear. Because if you don't, if fear just becomes a wordless darkness that you avoid, or perhaps even to momentarily forget, you open yourself to further attacks of fear because you never truly fought the opponent that defeated you. You know, I've told the story many times of being in a counseling session with Donna, where after I was finished talking, she kind of leaned back and she looks at me and she says, Danielle, how many times are we going to talk about this? You know, and of course I'm like, we've never talked about this. This just happened to me yesterday. This is brand new. And of course, what she is explaining, like the author of The Life of Pi is explaining, is that fear has to be dealt with, because if it isn't dealt with, it's going to come back, and it's going to come back. And you may think, oh, well, this is a different situation. This is a different situation. But oftentimes that fear, that primordial fear, is what's driving a lot of those things. So you think it's just one thing, but you could have one fear as a child that has carried all the way through into your adult life. And we'll talk about that a little bit more shortly. The next reading comes from unity.org, and this is from Reverend Galen McDowell, and he calls his article In Faith Over Fear. And he says, life is a mystery. Life is forever changing, and no matter how hard, people want some things to stay the same. Changes happen, and change causes fear. He says, for some people, the unpredictability of life is problematic. The human ego, functioning out of fear of the unknown, tries to control people, situations, politics, religion, and anything it can dominate to maintain control, false control, and feel safe. Some people are looking for assurance in the midst of constant evolution. And the challenge is, no matter how hard we try to preserve a way of life, it will change. Human consciousness fears what it cannot control. Anything different from the norm is scary to the preservation of what we think is the status quo. So then fear kind of starts to dictate what we do and how we behave. So he says we cannot allow the lower levels of human thinking based on fear, uncertainty, and ignorance to dictate our decisions. We must transcend the limited view of the human ego and connect with a higher level of awareness, seeing beyond the facts and limited perceptions to the goodness of God. So again here, somebody else saying, these are two different parts of ourselves. This is the duality of our nature, to fear and to have faith. And to get over that fear, we have to rise above in consciousness. Limited perceptions, he talks about. This is what we see in front of us. It's not always the truth. Fillmore says that faith is the perceiving power of the mind. All of us know this sentence, linked with the power to shape substance. So faith is our ability to see possibilities. It resides, as I said, it's our spiritual consciousness. Faith is a spiritual gift. And what it is, it's complete trust and confidence in somebody or something. Faith doesn't see obstacles and problems and lack. Faith sees ideas and opportunities. It looks beyond those appearances and sees potential for good. All of us have experienced both true faith and true fear. And we know faith is better because faith offers us this feeling of ease and calm in the presence of anything, other people, other places, new experiences, scary things. But when that fear comes in, it's only faith that can redirect it. It's only faith that offers us any real protection from fears, both seen and unseen. You might remember a lesson I did about the fiery furnace, and it's in the book of Daniel, chapter 3. And it's this King Nebuchadnezzar. It says he is full of fire and fury. And what he wants, if you recall the story, is he wants everyone to worship his God. He wants, which is represented in this world by a golden idol, and it's represented by he himself. He wants all the people, the Jewish people, to bow down to him, to bow down to this golden idol, and he wants them to worship that. And he says, if you refuse, you're going to be thrown into this fiery furnace. And he's talking about a real furnace here. He's even saying, we're going to turn it up even hotter than it usually is, for you guys. And there are these three men who you might remember, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I never say his name right. But metaphysically, those three things represent meekness, love, and light. And they refuse to bow down to him. They're not going to do it. They don't care if he's threatening them with death and being burned alive, because they have so much faith in the God of their being, the God that they believe is the true God. They're not afraid, no matter what happens to them, one way or the other. They're not afraid, and they're not going to do it. So when you look at that story metaphysically, it takes place in Babylon, and Babylon means confusion. And when we're in a consciousness of confusion, what lens of our nature are we looking through? A lot of times we're relying on the sense consciousness. We're relying on the outside world and hints from out there to help us, make decisions. But when the world is guiding and directing us, oftentimes it's directing us into other things that cause fear. So what we need to do, again, switch. We have to rely on the consciousness that speaks spirit through us. Our God self, once again, is the only thing that's going to save us from fear. So again, we've found ourselves in confusion. Again, the dual personality gets caught up in both. And oftentimes the thoughts of that subconscious fear are so strong that we feel we're kind of captives to it. And we can become so convinced of what we're seeing with our eyes that we begin to believe that that's true. And we begin to accept all the conditions of this lie. And, it snowballs. Truth Unity says, in metaphysically breaking this down, he says, the realm of mind that worships gold, unless you accept its commercial customs, it will put you in the fiery furnace of persecution. But if you're true to the highest and you refuse to bow down to the idols of the world and meet its fiery persecutions with what? Meekness, love, understanding. When you do that, you come out unscathed, like these guys did. These guys walked out of that furnace. Their clothes weren't even burned. They didn't smell like smoke. It was nothing to them. In addition to those three coming out of the furnace, even another figure comes out that represents our I am. So human judgment is suspended here, and we recognize the true power of God. Spirit. And spirit harmonizes everything. So when they've come out, this fear, all of this craziness has been harmonized. So we be true only to our highest thinking to, again, save us from any kind of persecution, any kind of fiery furnaces. Does anybody know who Jay Shetty is? Yeah, exactly. So Jay Shetty wrote a book called Think Like a Monk, because he's no longer a monk. He's a monk dropout. I don't remember at the beginning of the book why he's no longer, but it's good for us because he's a smart guy. He has a lot of good things to say. And what he says in his book about fear is he says that growing up, most of us were either taught directly or indirectly that fear is negative. You're told, don't be a scaredy cat. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid, right? And even some of us in school, if you were afraid of something, you could be made fun of for that because other people weren't afraid of that. So it also fear becomes kind of embarrassing sometimes. But, the fact is that fear isn't good or bad. It's a warning flag. It's your mind telling you, things don't look good here. Something could go wrong. So real fear can be critical. It's a critical warning to help us survive. And in the face of true danger. Now, what most of us are referring to when we say we're fearful, we have these daily anxieties about our work, things that I mentioned before, health and money and jobs and this and that, things that are outside of ourselves. We do have fear of losing these things. But what we're not realizing is as we hold on to those fears, the more you hang on to them, the more toxic they become to you, the more true they become to you in mind. Earlier, I talked about the difference between being scared, which is kind of a superficial thing, and opposed to deep-seated fear. And I explained the differentiation there. But the problem is that when your human brain shouts fear, your mind and your body, because we felt our bodies, I think all of us can kind of feel what fear feels like, because our bodies can't differentiate whether that fear is a real threat or if it's something imagined. And so we don't know if our survival is in jeopardy, or we're just afraid to go to a party or something, or go to somewhere we've never been before. So according to Jay Shetty, there are 4 different emotional, so that's human, reactions to fear. We panic, we freeze, we run away, or we bury it. So do you notice in the human consciousness, dealing with the fear is not even an option. It doesn't even come to mind. So, and again, you have to change your perception. If we can change our perception of fear, change our relationship to it, then we can start to learn how better to respond when we're triggered by things, as we go through life. When you start to panic, you start to anticipate things that have not happened yet and that most likely aren't going to happen. But can we acknowledge first the presence of fear? Can we just acknowledge it, that it's there, suspend judgment for a minute, and kind of take a breath and say to ourselves, what is it that I'm really afraid of? Because that's the first step to dealing with our fears, to healing those fears. We have to short circuit the power that we've given it. Short circuit this power it has over our thinking minds. So in his book, Jay offers a meditation that does that. And what he's asking us to do is to do meditations in fear, which might sound counterproductive, but what he's asking you to do is just sit and get quiet and imagine a fear that you're having trouble with, and imagine it to the point that you're feeling it and you know what that is. And then you continue to ask yourself, what is it that I'm really afraid of? And ask yourself for, as long as it takes until you start to uncover where that fear came from from the beginning. Because it's only by getting to the root of the fear is that you can really heal it in a permanent way. And also, what he was saying is that he says, like all new thought practices will tell us, where are we attaching the I am? When we're meditating on these things, we don't want to say, I am angry, I am fearful, I am scared, I am, whatever I am. But what we want to do is we shift into the spiritual consciousness and start to understand that we are not our emotions. We feel human emotions. So it's okay and probably necessary in acknowledging to tell yourself, I feel sad. I feel afraid. And then that way we are separating it from the reality. So we feel these particular negative emotions in the moment, but we begin to learn that we can accept emotions as being temporary. They are always temporary because they come from our human consciousness. And that's another way we dispel our fear, is to put it where it belongs, In addition to the meditation, he suggests journaling And he suggests this as finding a pattern, to find a pattern of our fears. Because then we can kind of see over time what we're all about. And I thought of this, it's an easy example. Say that you get upset and angry when you have to repeat yourself, or when the waitress hasn't gotten to your table fast enough, or somebody's cutting you off in traffic. Those kind of things can be traced all the way back, maybe, to not feeling heard, to not feeling seen. And so that's why those things bother you. It's never about somebody cutting you off in traffic. It's never about the checker at the grocery store. So through these meditations, we find out, what is it about? What is it really about? So oftentimes what needs to be healed is a negative attitude. It's our self-confidence, it's our self-esteem and sense of who we are that needs healing more often than not. Because when we have a better sense of ourselves and we know what we're all about, those things don't bother us anymore. So hopefully that makes sense, because getting to the source of what am I really afraid of is kind of where we have to go to get a complete healing on that. Fear can be a tricky thing because it's a motivator, but it can motivate us toward what we want, but it can also limit us to what we think we have to do to keep ourselves safe. It can limit us, and we start telling those stories. All right. The last thing I was going to share, this is another favorite Bible for me, is the book of Job. And so Job is described as a prosperous man of outstanding faith. And if you're familiar with the story, you probably are, Satan acts as this sort of agent, this provocateur, it says, to test whether or not Job's faith, is it really rooted in spirituality, or is it just rooted in prosperity and stuff? Because he's got a lot of stuff. But when faced with the appalling loss of his possessions, his children, and finally his health, Job still refuses to curse God. He's unafraid. He's still this man of faith. But, on the other side of that faith, he's also a prosperous guy who, like a lot of us, we're afraid of losing what we've got. And, this is a guy who, after dinner with his family, his sons who are doing very well and giving the dinner, this is a guy who the next morning, he's going to the temple and he's lighting sacrifices for the two of them just in case they've sinned in their heart. So he's a man of faith, but like all of us, he worries too. He worries about his kids, right? So a lot of stuff, as I said, is taken from him. His livestock and children, his health, all of these things. And the most faithful people in the world would get discouraged by this. It seems as though the world is collapsing around us sometimes. But the reason I chose this story is to point out his quote that he says when things start going downhill. And what he says is, "What I feared has come upon me. What I dreaded has happened to me. I have no peace, no quietness. I have no rest, only turmoil." So it's a telling statement, because in this statement, he's acknowledging that he's had fears about losing these things. He's saying, what I feared has come upon me. Just like us, there's two sides to his nature. He recognizes that in the moment of loss, it's what we think on that's grown. He starts to understand that negativity will eventually manifest itself when you worry enough about something. It happened to him. And in addition to that, he acknowledges what happens when you allow fear to come in. You have no peace, you have no quiet, you have no rest. So those things accompany a loss in faith. It's not worth it, and we've all felt that emptiness, we know what a miserable and lonely place fear can be. Franklin Roosevelt famously told us, we have nothing to fear but fear itself. And he's right. Fear is a poison, and if we allow it to consume our minds, it can ultimately cause more harm to us than a diagnosis or hurt feelings or an injury. So let's take some advice from these sages. Let's try to pay attention to what triggers us and begin to work with these fears instead of letting them control us. And there's several ways we do that. I'm going to say first, Mark was reading at the beginning, Mark talked about blessing. And blessing, I'm going to add that in to things that we can do to overcome our fear, is to bless it. Bless what's in front of us at the moment, because it's there to teach us something, okay? And other ways, our present moment awareness, our acknowledgement of maybe not the truth, but the facts in front of us. Meditation, prayer, journaling, pausing to breathe. Whatever practices you've learned and brought into your life that can help you have the courage to face and deal with your fear so that you can ultimately transform into faith, do those things. Okay? We can transform our fear into faith. Okay? So let's do it.